On a gathering storm comes a tall, handsome man in a dusty black coat with a red right hand. Oh, who says you can't shake your little booty to red right hand, huh? Who made that rule? This is a series called Scream for Dummies, where I welcome all you Scream-deficient people into our world. That way you understand when us nerds say things like, my lawyer liked that. You should definitely start with parts 1 and 2 because I always cover the behind-the-scenes story of the franchise as I go along, so I'll be picking up today where I left off in part 2. Then I do a plot breakdown and I pull out all the most iconic moments to get you up to speed. Sometimes I talk about how the horror is crafted in certain scenes, and I also include all the most underrated moments that I feel like don't get enough love. And if there's one thing that I know to be true about this installment of the franchise is that it does not get the love it's due. But before I explain why, if you're interested in getting fast-tracked into the Scream fandom, I can actually help you with that. Joining the Cult of Haunted Hippie is actually one of the easiest and most affordable ways to enter the Scream fandom. For the low price of free, you can subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that you never miss our next meeting. It also helps to give the video a like, swear your allegiance in the comments section, etc, etc. So now that you've taken care of that, we can get on with our super nerdy history lesson. In every installment of my series, I've been using this book, It All Began with a Scream, to share all the juicy secrets of the franchise. Last time we left off talking about the success of Scream 2 and how all the other releases were scurrying and scrambling to get out of the way. James Cameron's Titanic moved its release date for Scream, like the power we hold. So we will pick up on the aftermath of Scream 2 because Scream 3 didn't come out right away like Scream 2 did. Because of their success, everyone kind of spread out and was doing their own thing by the time the ball got rolling on Scream 3. Wes Craven leveraged his success with Scream to direct a drama called Music of the Heart starring Meryl Streep. He was hoping this would be a breakout moment for him because, I'm not sure you're gonna like this next part, he wanted to be doing drama. He always felt a little ashamed of horror, I think. The director might have seen Music of the Heart as his possible exit plan from the genre. Oop! Okay, told you wouldn't like it. This earned Meryl Streep an Academy Award nomination though, so good for them, I guess. Also, the deal he made to be able to make Music of the Heart is one of the only reasons why he agreed to direct Scream 2. Look, our favorite creators are not indebted to us to treat their most popular films as their little babies, you know? It is a business at the end of the day, but we'll always have Don Mancini and Chucky. Kevin Williamson, on the other hand, was having no trouble with his creative endeavors. He launched Dawson's Creek, Wasteland, he wrote The Faculty, he produced Halloween H2O, but all of that meant that he was not available to write the script for Scream 3. I think there was a lot of pressure on Kevin personally and professionally to continue to one-up himself. I think it was hard for him to be stuck as that guy doing only that one thing. There's this huge push and pull that we've been exploring throughout this series between studios and their creators. Bob and Harvey Weinstein are these absolute megalomaniac rich boys who had everyone under their thumb. For a long time in Hollywood, and still to this day, there was pretty much nothing you could do about that. The people with the money have the power, and these power structures obviously cause a lot of harm. People like Wes Craven feel like they don't really have an option because on the one hand, they do not want to work for these people, but on the other, they feel indebted because they're responsible for their flourishing careers. And a Hollywood career is so finicky, it can disappear overnight. There was no guarantee that another studio would hire them. So when Williamson's work was getting picked up left and right, of course he's gonna chase those leads. This meant that his original plan for Scream 3 would not come to fruition, but his busy schedule was not the only reason why. We wanted to basically tell the story of Woodsboro 10 years later after everything had happened and the town had gone up into a curfew lockdown. The kids that were too young to know the teenagers when Scream happened were now teenagers themselves and had lived in the shadow of that and were fucked up as a result. They're coming back to shoot a Scream reboot in the town, so that was the basic premise, and then Columbine happened. Now here's where things get heated because we have to start discussing the longest running debate of the franchise, the return of Stu Macher. Williamson's plan entailed the character having survived his brush with death by television and now acting as a puppet master to the teenagers of Woodsboro from his prison cell. This trivia has made fans rabid for the last 2 decades. Of course, we all love Stu Macher. I myself have even taken part in this delusion. In my Scream 5 predictions video, I made a goof out of myself making predictions about his return, but now I've wizened these past few years. I've taken a good hard look at myself in the mirror and I've said, Kylie, you need to move on. When they scrapped that plan, they scrapped it, but fans are still hell-bent on seeing him return. They didn't lose hope for Scream 4, they didn't lose hope for Scream 5, and some of them are still in my comments to this day way not losing hope for Scream 6. Seriously, go to my video making predictions for Scream 6, or even on my last Scream for Dummies videos. I'm sure there are comments there too. I will never say never, but I have personally hopped off that bus. One of the most damning pieces of evidence that he will not be returning is something we won't cover until part 4 though, so we'll come back to that. The next fan theory is kind of a reach, but it's also relevant. I think it has similar levels of absurdity with still a shred of a possibility of happening. McGowan said that over the years, fans have been intrigued by the fact that Tatum had 2 beds in her bedroom, which could have led to the actress's return. She also did an IndieWire interview talking about how badly she wants to come back to the franchise. You know how Danielle Harris is really desperate to get back into the Halloween franchise? Well, Rose McGowan is the same way. So in her IndieWire interview, she said, "I always thought Tatum should have had a twin that came back and was like hell to the no and had dark hair and revenged her. In a perfect world, I thought that would have actually been a really smart element. She could still do that. She could still have a twin that was maybe institutionalized and got out and is like, it's on. She could have been the family shame because the family was kind of perfect." Now, I've thrown a lot of love towards this actress because Tatum is one of my favorite characters ever. I also dedicated a moment to her in part 2 of Scream for Dummies because she was one of the first women to publicly out Harvey Weinstein for his crimes. However, in recent years, she's actually become a much more controversial figure, which I was not aware of. This next bit isn't too bad, it's just to provide some context. She feels like Hollywood's battle against sexual assault in the entertainment industry is only skin deep, labeling the Me Too movement as bullshit. She felt left out of the survivors community and brunches despite being one of the most outspoken members. I never said Me Too was a lie, ever. I was talking about Hollywood and Time's Up, not Me Too. This might be a hot take, but I agree with her because I think I understand what she's trying to say. Me Too had this moment a while back, but it all felt very performative and it didn't really accomplish anything. All the same power dynamics are still present in the industry. All these abusers still get these multi-million-dollar deals. I get why she feels left out. Back in the 90s when she spoke out, she got blacklisted. And now it's like this trendy movement to be a part of. I do sympathize with her. However, it's when she starts to become very hypocritical that I have to step back and be like, okay, maybe stop talking, Rose McGowan. Apparently, she openly supports Donald Trump, which is bizarre because if you compare Trump and Weinstein and their like Venn diagrams of sexual assault allegations and stuff, it's a fucking circle, okay? She also endorsed Larry Elder for governor of California, who has been credibly accused of domestic abuse. She has also previously caused a stir among the LGBTQ community, stating that activists don't do enough to help the cause of women's rights. I've linked this article down below, by the way, if you want to read the whole thing. Okay, so I'm trying to look into it further while I'm editing, and what I have found is that apparently she was pretending to be a Republican for 3 months. It was part of some $200 bet with her brother. Listen, I don't know. Regardless of if it was real or not, to use your platform to platform other horrific people is not great. Like, that is such a fine line that you walk between supporting these people and being like, oh, it was just all a joke. Only people in extremely privileged positions have the ability to do something like that. So yeah, still don't like it. Still do not like it. I think a lot of that is very weird of her, honestly. I don't know that I would be willing to like just welcome her right back with open arms. I hate to say it, because as much as I love Tatum, I just feel like if Rose McGowan got back involved, it would bring a really weird energy to the community. That's the weird thing about horror and conventions and all of this. It's so much more community-based than I think any other type of fandom, so you do have to consider the real-life person and the implications of what it would mean to like bring them into that. I always thought if Miramax hadn't been the worst company in the world to work for and what happened to me hadn't happened, I think it would have been very smart to have her twin come back and seek revenge. So what do you think? Do you want to see the quasi-return of Tatum? How do you feel? Now back to the return of Stu. Wes was ultimately the one that didn't want to go forward with that plan. The reason being that one of the most horrific school shootings in US history had taken place in 1999 and people were looking for anyone to blame. So horror movies were yet again brought up in the conversation of this rise of violence in the world. Horror has kind of always been a scapegoat for that kind of thing, so there are lines in this movie referencing that. Also, Wes decided he didn't want to do a movie where kids were killing kids. Why add fuel to the fire, you know? In retrospect, it is easy to go, oh man, why didn't they just bring back Stu? Obviously horror movies don't incite violence, that's absurd. But when you live in America, eventually you or someone you know will probably be involved in a shooting. For me, it happened in my college town at a bar where a bunch of my acquaintances went every week to line dance. It's just the grim, awful fucking reality of living here, and I completely understand they're wanting to distance themselves from teen violence. So they needed someone else to come in and write it because Williamson wasn't available and his original outline wouldn't work, and they went with Aaron Kruger, a fantastically ironic last name, I think. But Bob Weinstein can never make anything easy, can he? He only had 2 weeks to deliver the script. Don't forget what Bob does. He would find a good writer and he would work them to death and put them on 20 projects and they'd have nervous breakdowns. Isn't that nice? Then they had to hire a ghostwriter to finish the script while it was already in production. The jokes in the film about the ever-changing Stab 3 script were grounded in reality.
Has there been another goddamn rewrite? How the fuck are we supposed to learn our lines when there's a new script every 15 minutes?
Bob would call us every morning before shooting and scream at us for 2 hours about the script, and then Lita would go off in her trailer and write. Again, I will belabor the point that the Weinsteins were fucking mongrels. He was making things miserable for the filmmakers, and this was trickling down to everyone. And that wasn't the only major issue facing this installment. Our favorite final girl, Neve Campbell, had signed on to Drowning Mona, and so she had scheduling conflicts. Neve Campbell agreed to come back to finish the trilogy, but her contract stated that she would only film for 3 weeks. It would be like $250,000 a day if we needed an extra day. So they're like, ugh, we made a star out of this woman, and now she actually wants to be paid like one? What the fuck? That's one of the main points of contention actually with the upcoming sequel, Scream 6. For the first time in history, Sidney Prescott will not be appearing in a Scream film. She came out and said she felt the offer they made was not reflective of the value she's brought to the franchise, and I believe her. This meant that the focal point of Scream 3 ended up being on Gale and Dewey. Courtney Cox and David Arquette even cut their honeymoon short to come start filming because they had bigger roles to fill. You can see in some scenes they're clearly a lot more tan than in others, so it gives you an idea of what order they shot the movie in. About 50 minutes into the movie, all of a sudden they're these bronzed babes, and you're like, maybe they were in Bora Bora or something. No, actually, I just looked it up because I was curious. Apparently they had their honeymoon in Florida, and I found an article that was written in 1999, and this is so funny. Where do famous folks go on their honeymoon? If Courtney Cox of Friends fame and new husband David Arquette from AT&T commercials are any indication, oh my god, David Arquette from AT&T commercials. Why did they do him so dirty? I'm sorry, David Arquette, you didn't deserve that. At this point, he was a pretty big star right alongside her with the Scream franchise, so I don't know why they did him like that. Anyway, so remember how in the last video we talked about how the movies mirror their real life relationship? As I just informed you, they came to film this right after their honeymoon. Let's talk about more of the cast though, because yet again, we have some very well-known faces in this film. Carrie Fisher has an excellent cameo, and it's one of my favorite of the franchise. Again, every actor was trying to get their moment in these movies, which makes sense because these cameos have lived on. Almost all the cameos are super fun and iconic, and they're well-remembered bits of these movies. Topher Grace from that 70s show was someone who auditioned. Naomi Watts auditioned as well. She would go on to become the queen of American remakes, something she still keeps up to this day. We also know that Jamie Kennedy returns for his legacy video, as well as his sister as a new character, Martha Meeks. It wasn't always planned that way though. At one point in development, the filmmakers toyed with resurrecting Randy back from the dead. There was also an earlier version of Randy's scene where Randy's sister shows up and she's a contortionist and is like contorting. Right on, right on. That's according to Patrick Lussier, who is a longtime editor and someone who's just generally involved with this franchise. I'm glad they scrapped those ideas, honestly. I don't know why they would make his sister a contortionist or how they thought they could bring Randy back from the dead. But one of the most important people they cast in this film, one of the most important castings of this whole franchise maybe, Parker Posey. I'm gonna have to hold my thoughts on Jennifer Jolie, but just know we have so much to talk about later. Posey also created a stir among fans when she was quoted in an interview prior to the film's release saying that she only signed on because she needed a paycheck. She clarifies later, "I was nervous to take on a part where I'd have to be scared and on the run." It's a good thing she clarified that because I think at the time fans felt kind of betrayed. She ended up being like the best thing about Scream 3, but I think regardless, it just kind of came off ungrateful. But she was grateful. She had just moved back to Hollywood after spending a year out of the country, and she really needed a paying job, and Scream 3 was just that. Now, obviously, with all the hoopla of the changing script, the new cast, Nev's limited availability, the on-set culture was not the same at all. Craven was his usual calm self, but because they were shooting in Hollywood, they were at home. Everyone went home at the end of the day. No one was partying anymore. By now, all the actors had other obligations, so we had to work around that. It wasn't camp. Pages are coming in that day or that morning, so it wasn't the fluidness of the first one. Everyone also had similar sentiments about how this did not feel like the first two sets at all, where on those sets, everyone was super happy and passionate about being there. It just wasn't a passion project to anybody, actors or Wes. It just seemed forced. So on top of everything else, they also were having to be even stricter about the script. And with this movie, it's to the point of absurdity. They wouldn't let anyone see the script before their audition, and they wouldn't let anyone take them with them when they left. Someone accidentally took the script out of the audition room, and they had to go track it down because he had dropped it in a trash can on the studio lot. Whereas the actors in Scream 2 were able to get a mostly complete script, the actors on Scream 3 were only given their scenes. They weren't able to fully contextualize what was happening in the film. Scott Foley, for example, didn't even know that he was the killer until a few weeks into shooting. I feel like that's a crazy way to manage a set, because how can anyone get the right performance out of these actors if they don't even know how crucial they are to the story? Luckily, Luckily, I don't actually feel like that comes through. I feel like his performance is more or less consistent. Overall, the making of Scream 3 was just a mess. It was very weird. It took forever to get everyone on the same page. But regardless, the movie opened up to a franchise record of $34.7 million in its opening weekend and almost entirely made back its budget in those 3 days. This was the only movie of the franchise not to cross $100 million domestically, but still went on to make $161 million worldwide. However, this is historically known as the black sheep of the franchise. Many Scream fans flat out do not like this film. You'll typically see it last on a lot of ranking lists. Purists who are wholeheartedly Team Williamson loathe Scream 3 simply because it's written by a different scribe. Being that it wasn't written by Williamson allowed those vocal critics a scapegoat to place their blame. It's also noted in this book that by the early 2000s, supernatural horror was reigning supreme. The Blair Witch Project came out in 1999, the year before, and then movies like The Others, Final Destination, and The Ring came out afterwards, and it was like, okay, so that's what people are trying to see. But Scream did revive the slasher genre nonetheless. By the late 90s, there were a ton of other Scream copycats coming out. They even revived the Halloween franchise. For better or for worse, in just that half decade, Scream completely revamped the whole horror landscape. And that is where I will leave our history lesson for now, to be continued in part 4. Here is where we get down to the nitty-gritty of what makes this third installment so iconic. It is time for the plot breakdown. I have to admit, this is probably my least favorite opening of the Scream franchise, despite us following a character that we already know. Cotton historically sucks. Like, I'm not sad about losing him as a character, but there's no one else they could have used here. He was the only other legacy character. I also definitely prefer the setting of Woodsboro. Even the college campus kind of has that cozy setting. Immediately, to no fault of the movie really, but when you open up on the Hollywood sign, it immediately just feels a little bit soulless. Also, at one point the opening sequence was going to center around a new character named Ben Damon. It's a spoof on Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, who were very popular at the time coming off of Good Will Hunting. I'm so glad they didn't do that because it just would not have meant much to me. Thank God Jada Pinkett Smith has pretty much remained an A-list celebrity, otherwise the opening of Scream 2 also would probably not mean much to me, because that is a problem with this movie. One of the cameos I just feel like doesn't hold any water, but we'll get there soon. I think that a Ben Affleck, Matt Damon spoof would have worked at the time when they were kind of in the heat of being fresh faces in Hollywood. I don't know that that would have aged as well and remained an iconic moment all these years later. Anyways, I do love that Miss Lily Vanderwoodson of Gossip Girl is playing Cotton's girlfriend. She's the other opening kill, so she's kind of a familiar face for me at least. Craven mentions that not only can the actress scream, but it was her ability to do so that won her the role. And I don't want to fully get into her because she spends most of her interview in this book just gushing about Liev Schreiber, to the point where I'm speculating that she was just straight up in love with him. He was just adorable, you know? I was just so happy to do it with him because I think he is such a strong actor. I think as an actress, you feel so safe with him. He would catch you know what I mean? It sounds almost romantic. Yeah, girl, it does. Anyway, one thing that's always bothered me about this scene is that she's already dried off, but her feet are dripping wet. But that's in service of her slipping at this point later in the scene when Ghostface is after her. Cotton is trying to get back to her to save her, and I actually like the fact that Ghostface has used his voice to make her think that Cotton is trying to attack her. I know that back then it seemed silly that Ghostface was able to capture and use their voices, but that's aged tremendously well. Especially with the deepfake technology that we have now. Like, I think that Scream 3 was kind of ahead of its time. So of course they're both killed, and I think the shortest opening sequence of a Scream movie, they're both dead before we hit the 10-minute mark. I thought the opening kill was the funnest kill, and if I was going to go out, I wanted to go out big. They just loved Cotton, and I got the benefit from that. It seemed like they were giving him this whole action sequence. It's a unique opening scene, and not bad by any means, but probably just my least favorite of the franchise. I feel like the openings that all take place in one location rely on much more clever means to kind of build the suspense, rather than doing something like having our protagonist be stuck in the infamous LA traffic. And I get that they let him be the hero in this opening sequence and they kind of redeem Cotton, but to me he's still just kind of that egomaniac. So let's check back in with our favorite final girl again. Sydney lives in the middle of nowhere with a dog. I feel like I would definitely still want to be around people. And my question is, how does she afford this place? Because she's a crisis counselor. I can't imagine she's making that much bank. This does feel like fitting character development for Sydney though. But remember how they only got 3 weeks to shoot with her? Yeah, so that's as much checking in as we do. She's on screen for like less than 2 minutes. So now we check back in with Gail, and I don't even want to talk about this, but we have to. Something else that fans have been vocal about over the years is Gail's bangs in Scream 3. But when it came to her hairstyle for the third film, Cox deferred to her husband. Arquette has said that the initial inspiration for the mangled bangs was Betty Page. That was my fault totally, and I'll take full responsibility. I don't think her bangs look that bad, and I think it's so tired to still be talking about it at this point. If that's the only thing that you can think to comment about in your Letterboxd review or in my comment section, I am literally begging you to get new material. Now I know that it's all David Arquette's fault. Luckily, Courtney Cox is a good sport. She feeds into it. She makes funny videos about it on like Instagram and stuff. But some of you guys are so annoying, I swear. And Gail does too, but on something else.
I swear my Pulitzer Prize, which I plan to win one day, detective.
Icon. Icon. We should all strive to be more like Gail. She has never needed a single drop of external validation in her life. But now police are actually asking for her help. She's on a Detective Gail Weathers type of beat. Okay, so now we're back at the Stab studio. An investigation is underway because of the recent murder. And I feel like this police officer, played by Josh Pais, is such an underrated character in this franchise.
He was making a movie called Stab. He was stabbed.
I'm pretty sure that that is my favorite line of his, and definitely the best line in that scene. But then we meet the actual best character of this movie. Jennifer Jolie, there she is. The chemistry between these actors is so electric. Parker Posey has to be one of the best comedic actresses of all time. Have you seen her in Best in Show? If not, you need to. We also find out that Dewey is on that set to help Jennifer, and the tension is really palpable because obviously we're Team Gale. Only true of this franchise because this Gale can eat a bag of dicks. Team PETA, heyo. Then we get a line of dialogue that has aged like a fine wine.
Pop culture is the politics of the 21st century.
Also, this guy is playing Dewey in the Stab movie, and Gale starts cracking up, and honestly, I get it. I love how self-deprecating the actors get to be in these movies and how much they poke fun at Dewey. This is also just one of the best and most meta things about this movie is all the characters interacting with the movie versions of themselves. Then we get the cameo with Wes Craven, there he is, little tourist, and then also Jay and Silent Bob. This is unfortunately one of those cameos that is just not impactful for me at all. And I get it probably was in the 90s. I know they're still playing these characters. One of their movies came out literally last year. But if you ask anyone my age, I don't think that any of us know who Jay and Silent Bob are. I feel like it's more of a millennial Gen Xer kind of thing. Whereas someone like Carrie Fisher was in one of the most famous franchises of all time. I already know that people in my comments are going to be like, how did you not know who they were? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Maybe you exist in an echo chamber. You ever think of that? Speaking of existing,
It's as if you don't exist.
That's the idea.
I've been knocking these transitions out of the park. Did you see how smooth that was? Speaking of existing, it's like you don't exist. Please. Anyway, we're finally setting up an interesting arc for Sydney, thank God. They're exploring the development that one would undergo after so many attempts have been taken on her life. She's really existing in her victim mentality at this point, which is understandable. What is not understandable is the next sequence. This dream sequence tripped me out so much the first time I saw it because I thought all of a sudden this was going to be like a supernatural movie. I still don't like it, but her mom is the center of this mystery in the film, so her imagery is a really strong motif. What do you guys think of Nightmare Maureen? Now, Sarah Darling's death is up next, and I think is so well executed, but it's a real bummer because here she goes on saying that she isn't a character, she's only in 2 scenes, she doesn't like being a 35-year-old playing a 21-year-old who dies naked, but this is my favorite line of hers.
Stab 3. Jesus, I gotta get a new agent.
The movie is so self-deprecating, like everyone was over it. It's the same thing as Scream 2, where they're really setting themselves up for critics to just rip it apart. And unfortunately with this movie, they did. And I'm sure they could have used that line as a reference. 2 things to note about her death. I love when she ends up in the costume and prop rooms, legitimately suspenseful. And she gets decked. You know I love me a good punch. I told you that I was going to take it upon myself to point out every single punch in this franchise. And this being the most slapsticky installment of the franchise, I will have a lot more to point out. Then Gail is explaining to Dewey why she's there to help and to get her story. I love how this explores their relationship status and kind of catches us up because she's like, Dewey, I stayed and I took care of you, but I couldn't stay in Woodsboro. But also Dewey lets her know that someone broke into the police department and stole a file on Sydney. I love how mystery vibes this movie is. I feel like a lot of the other movies are kind of lacking that. What this movie is not lacking in is comedy. Can the Jennifer Jolie stans please rise up?
I haven't had one of these in a year and a half. Someone's gonna pay for this.
Jennifer, settle down.
That is one of her best lines before she jumps into the arms of Kronk. Sorry, Patrick Warburton, but he is Kronk to me. What do you want me to do? Especially because I just rewatched The Emperor's New Groove. And when he calls Dewey Dewdrop, all I hear is Kronk. Hey, Dewdrop. Hey, Dewdrop.
Hey, Dewdrop, got your girlfriend out here.
He's too good. His time is too short in this movie. But Gail is now having to come to terms with the fact that Dewey is a desirable man.
If you weren't so concerned with pretensions and appearances, you'd be able to appreciate the positivity and emotional centeredness I provide.
Dewey is truly at his best when he's reading Gail. He has his absolute best dialogue in Scream 2 and 3, and that is a hill I am very much willing to die on. Now we're back with our buddy cop duo on set, and Mark is starting to seem a little bit sus. Patrick Dempsey was a late addition, cast as Detective Kincaid delayed the day before he was due on set with multiple dialogue-heavy scenes to be filmed right off the bat. Based on how well he handled himself, he was added into more scenes. And now he and Sydney are married. Isn't that wild? Allegedly, blah. That's the fan theory, but there is some proof. I mean, they flirt a lot in this movie, but we'll get there in part 5. But this is another underrated line from Detective Wallace.
All right, this is the scene where you come with us.
Like, please, why do we forget about him? I do think he kind of gets overshadowed by this next line of dialogue that's very, like, creepy, Weinstein meta-esque.
Remind me not to sleep with him again.
Ew. I've also gotten a lot of comments from people asking what happened with Harvey Weinstein, what did he do? For one thing, I don't want to have to respond to everyone individually and explain what happened, but for another thing, I don't want to explain it in a video because I don't want to get demonetized. You're on YouTube right now, so I know that you have Google. Use it. Anyway, things start to heat up because Ghostface has found Sydney and then poor Kronk gets murdered. It's kind of hard to take the scenes with Sydney seriously because those scenes very much exist in the same sort of space as the original Scream movies, but then they bounce back and forth from those to the super campy, ridiculous, over-the-top Hollywood death scenes. And the next one is one of the most ridiculous of them all. I love it. They get a fax with a script of what's about to happen. Like, how archaic is that? Then the Dewey wannabe explodes, and so does the house. Like, this movie is insane. Then everyone tumbles down the fucking hill, a mess. Fun fact, this is also the most digital effects heavy scene of the entire franchise. As far as direction about his death, Kiesler didn't receive much from Craven about what he was supposed to do while being blown up. That's when I did that weird wah type of thing, and that was me trying to get into the method acting of how a person would feel when they're being blown up. I imagine that was so awkward to shoot, and I always thought it was practical. I know he didn't really get blown up, please, but I thought that they blew up the house, and it might have been mixed with like practical and digital, but I was expecting it to mostly be practical because they had the biggest budget they ever had on this one. I don't think there's another explosion in a Craven movie, correct me if I'm wrong, and none of these goons had ever experienced a real explosion, so of course no one could give him any direction. But then Dewey is shooting at Ghostface and then tumbles down the hill again. I love the slapstick comedy so much. We get 2 more punches, Jennifer punches Dewey and Gail punches Jennifer. Finally, Gail isn't on the receiving end.
My lawyer liked that.
And that line never ends up on top 10 lists of the dialogue. Are you kidding me? Then they're back at the station, they're talking about what happened, and Dewey has another top 10 interaction.
Is that a threat, Detective? When it's a threat, you'll know it. Was that a threat?
Bless his stupid little heart. I fucking love Dewey. I can't believe it took me this long. I wasted so many years hating him. And for what? For what? I've grown. That's what we in the biz call character development. Now yet another unsung iconic line from Detective Wallace. Roll the clip.
Watch the fucking aliens.
It's an off-screen line and I don't even know why it makes me laugh, but some of the throwaway lines in the Scream movies are the best ones. Like, remember the one from the first Scream video? Where that one random extra is talking about the fake blood and he's like, why do they do that? It's too red. It's too red. What is it? What is it about that? It really gets me. But then what's this? Martha Meeks is here to deliver a video of Randy explaining the rules of trilogies to us. This made me so happy the first time I saw this movie. I was like, no, we're throwing out the old rules, baby. New rules are in town. The main character can die, the killer will be unkillable, and you gotta forget everything you know about the past. The girlies are nervous though, so of course now we get the iconic bit of Jennifer committing to stay by Gail's side. How cute. Then we get one of the best chase scenes of the entire franchise, and I'm sorry, but it's true. Sydney shows up and sees that her room is like an exact replica. It's very strange. It's all taking her back. Then she gets yoinked out the window, and this chase scene is fantastic. She runs up the stairs. She's using all the film stuff. She almost falls out a fake door. It's so meta. This is kind of where I feel like Scream 3 might start to lose people because it is so deeply committed to the bit. I feel like they're pulling it off in this scene. But I don't like the sound effects. This one in particular is so cartoonish. Boink! What is this? Fucking Tom and Jerry? This scene is also one of the most blatant examples of what I call the sad Sid face. I'm pretty sure she grows out of it after this movie, but it is egregious here. It's the scrunched up lip and tense forehead and squinty eyes. You won't be able to unsee it in the movies now. Sorry about that if you never noticed it. Now you will have no choice. Then this next scene is quite disturbing. I don't want to really get into it because I do feel like actually genuinely creeped out and disturbed by how meta it is. They're confronting the producer about Rena Reynolds, who turns out to be Maureen Prescott, and thank God Jennifer comes through with some comedic relief.
You're obsessed with her and you're obsessed with her daughter!
Right, easy, Geraldo.
This is not the city for innocence. You want to get ahead in Hollywood? You're to play the game or go home.
Fuck that. Work for ethical people. The workers have the power. I've made an oath not to take any kind of bullshit PA position again because I've been royally fucked in the past. Sorry, I need to stop swearing. Eventually word gets around and the well of young naive assistants will dry up for these assholes. Now I just want to cover this next scene for the sole purpose of putting our tinfoil hats on. Sydney and Kincaid are talking and they're both bonding over the fact that their lives seem to like revolve around death.
What's your favorite scary movie?
My life.
Mine too.
This has always given me pause because I'm like, why would that be their favorite? I think it sounded really cool when someone wrote it down, like, yeah, they're bonding because their real life is their favorite scary movie. Let's think about that for approximately 2 more seconds and then maybe workshop it. Regardless, Team Mark and Sydney, heterosexual excellence. But anyway, welcome to Act 3. We're in this old Hollywood mansion. It's incredible. It's a real old Hollywood mansion. You can read up on the story behind it in this book. Also not sponsored. I know that a bunch of my subs have bought this book because I'm reading it as well. And there's a lot more in here that I obviously can't cover because that would take forever. But yeah, no one told me to pitch this to you guys. It's genuinely a really great book. So moving on, Gail finds Roman dead in a box and their reactions are too good. I love their girly screaming.
Is he dead?
And honestly, the scenes of them holding hands and running around are so powerful. Imagine if we continued to get this duo throughout the franchise. Or no, they should have had like their own spin-off TV show. Like imagine they had their own buddy comedy TV show where they solve mysteries. Ugh, never forget what they took from you. So then Sydney's actress dies, and the only reason why it's worth mentioning is because of what Gail and Jennifer bring to the scene. Scream queens. Then Dewey gets punched in the face twice and then he gets kicked in the face. It's incredible. It was at this moment though that I was thinking, what was the point of Roman faking his death? Because I was like, he's literally trying to kill them all. Surely he thought that he would be successful in this master plan. Why did his dumb ass go through the trouble of stuffing himself in that little box? But now we really have to talk about what they took from us. There's this weird soundproof closet and Jennifer Jolie is killed, but she's like, no, I'm the killer in Stab 3. So maybe Gail is the killer in Scream 6. No, I'm kidding completely, but I think that line of dialogue led to some theories about Scream 4. Obviously, this death is very upsetting to me personally. She told 2Fab that she liked her character's death and the symbolism it holds. When asked, Lucia said that it's something that probably would have gotten fixed if they had had the opportunity. Imagine if the filmmakers had the foresight to realize how iconic she would be. This book also doesn't continue that quote, so I don't know what symbolism she is referring to. I always thought that it was just adding to the body count. I never really read into it. Here's my best guess. It was the part of Gail that couldn't fully commit to Dewey finally dying. Jennifer Jolie seemed to hold all of the worst attributes about Gail Weathers: fame-hungry, rude, unempathetic. So maybe it was meant to represent that finally Gail could kind of let that part of herself go, her pride or something. Then they go on to continue the inside joke of Dewey being able to survive anything to a slapsticky degree. He gets bonked by the butt of a knife and he falls down the stairs. We also get the classic knife wipe yet again, even if it's not as good. Who else gets turned on by that? Those super subtle homages are honestly what I live for. I already know I'll be talking your ear off about them in Scream 5. Then Sydney gets lured to the mansion, and I find it comical how they take any opportunity to beat up on Dewey. Like, look how hard she rips the tape off. And this dialogue.
Where is he?
I don't know.
He's right there!
I'm actually in stitches for majority of the runtime. This is the funniest Scream.
It's a scream, baby!
I know I've used that clip before, but you don't blame me, right? Then this is crazy. Sydney is like, it's your turn to scream. Then Mark gets stabbed, and Sydney basically gets knocked out, and then Kincaid does too. Like, get it together. They said we need stunt work on this film. Actually, in the original version of the ending, Kincaid doesn't show up to save her. Dempsey had to wear a wig because he cut his hair between when the film originally wrapped and when this sequence was reshot. That would suck for Patrick Dempsey, but props to the hair and makeup team because usually I can sniff out a wig pretty easily, and I've never been able to tell. Good for Patrick Dempsey for being so handsome and so in the right place at the right time that they were like, yeah, fuck it, let's make him our third act hero. So then of course we have the most infamous reveal. Sydney ends up in this screening room that's absolutely to die for. Roman is the killer. He reveals he's the secret half-sibling of Sydney, and Maureen shut the door in his face when he came to find them. I do not mind this reveal. I don't mind Roman as a killer. He's really only memorable because of this reveal. He's not the best character. I love the mystery of Maureen Prescott because even in the first movie, Sydney is like, I don't know if I even knew who my mom really was. I don't love when Roman is like, you're the villain, Sydney, because no, the absolute fuck she is not. I don't understand that logic, but I guess without it, we wouldn't have had this movie, huh? Lots of fun facts about this reveal. He originally wasn't going to be a solo killer. He is the only solo killer of the entire franchise. The suggestion was to have Angelina Tyler, played by Emily Mortimer, secretly be Roman's girlfriend and his accomplice in the murders. She would have been an old classmate of Sydney's from high school. This has also led to one of the biggest theories, with some fans believing that Roman is actually in the first two films watching over everything. The theory picked up more steam with the knowledge that at one point the filmmakers were going to have Ghostface in the closing shot of Scream 2. I mean, in this scene he does say that he gave Billy pointers, so he had to have been around at some point. I do think this is one of the more underrated lines from the climax here. This producer is begging for his life and he's like, please, I'll give you final cut.
I already have it.
That's pretty badass, if I may be so candid with you all. I also don't mind that this guy gets his throat slit. I also wonder if the Weinsteins were watching that and they were going, oh, okay. Or maybe they greenlit this script to overcompensate when in reality they were kind of just telling on themselves. But then we get one of Sydney's best moments in the franchise.
God, why don't you stop your whining and get on with it? I've heard this shit before.
Stop!
She's tired of it, and honestly, same. There is a ton of punching before Sydney gets shot, and it looks like it's over for her, but they pull the Back to the Future thing, and she's actually alive. This is also famously where Neve Campbell missed the safety pad and actually stabbed Scott Foley, so his screams of pain are real. She did the same thing to Skeet Ulrich in the first movie. Are we sure she's not doing this on purpose? Then when he jumps back up in true Scream fashion, Idiot Dewey keeps shooting the vest, and they're like, the head, Dewey, the head. I love this though, because he's a complete rookie when it comes to dealing the final death blow to the killers. Gale and Sydney had been there before, they had given the death blow, but Dewey had always been incapacitated by this point in the previous films. Just very much on brand. I'm a fan of this moment. Then in the resolution, Gale and Dewey get engaged, and it's the sweetest thing, though there is a twinge of sadness to it.
I know it'll never work. You know it'll never work, but what I'm asking is just to see if we're wrong.
In retrospect, when you hear him go, I know that it'll never work, you're like, don't cry. Such beautifully tragic foreshadowing to Scream 4 and especially Scream 5. But we end the movie with Sydney back at home with the gang and the door swings open and she's just like, yeah, that's fine. That symbolism is maybe a little bit on the nose because I always think, what about the wind that'll blow like leaves and dust into your house? But it's nice. It's a very nice little bow to wrap on the original trilogy. Overall, I do think this is a highly underrated film, but you do have to be the right audience for it. I personally love the comedy, the slapstick action, Jennifer Jolie, all of it. It does feel a little bit more soulless than the other installments, but I feel like that kind of enhances the location of it. The whole movie is a commentary on how vile and heartless the entire movie industry is. I recognize that won't hit a lot of you as close to home, but I have had to deal with this shitty industry for the past few years. This movie was definitely ahead of its time in a lot of ways, but don't worry, I'm not under the delusion that one day it'll be re-examined as a misunderstood masterpiece. The tone of it isn't right for that, because of course none of the horror in this movie is crafted as masterfully as it is in the other two installments, but I'll always defend it. I have a lot of love to give for Scream 3. That will do it for today though. I would love to know any and all of your thoughts down below. This is one of the most divisive of the franchise and people always have interesting things to say. Unless it's about Gale's hair, then I don't want to hear it. You also may have noticed these names scrolling on screen. These are my lovely patrons. We've welcomed a bunch of new people lately, which has been really fun. Over there, I post all of my solo reviews of movies that I don't feel like giving a whole in-depth review on my main channel. In about a week here, I'll be posting my first thoughts on Scream 6 over there, so I don't know, you might want to join us. If not, you can also join us on all my other social media platforms. I'm the most active probably on like Instagram and Twitter. That's all linked down below, so go nuts, have a blast over there. Remember to click the notification bell too so that you don't miss Scream for Dummies Part 4. We're really getting down to the wire here. Scream 6 is truly almost upon us, so I am hustling to get all this content out for you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Scream for Dummies, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!